Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. And to answer Deborah's question, we will be sending out the presentations today after the webinar. Okay, welcome everyone. This is Joyce Sacco from the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to provide you with information about logistics. Make sure you can get online while we talk so you can access the visual component of the presentations today. You should have received an email from me yesterday afternoon. First, click the Ready Talk link, enter your name, email address, and click Register, and you will be given access to the meeting. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in using the chat feature in the lower left-hand screen, and we'll ask questions throughout and also do a question-answer period at the end. Finally, both PowerPoint presentations and additional resource information will be sent out after today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Dina Schlossberg, Deputy Director and Senior Attorney for Multifamily Housing at Regional Housing Legal Services. Dina has more than 25 years of experience in the area of real estate and partnership law, concentrating primarily on community development and economic development initiatives. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you, Joyce. And I want to welcome all of our guests and attendees to today's program, and a special also thank you to our two fine speakers for today's program. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our two speakers and set up the agenda for today's program, and then I'm going to let them go forward. So I have to say, Juan, that this is a special treat for me because I have known both Mark Shelburne and Holly Glauser for a very long time. Mark and Holly are both national leaders in the field of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and particularly both have a specialized knowledge of housing finance agencies, how they operate, what their scope of obligations are, and their relationship especially to the Qualified Allocation Plan and to the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So let me do a brief introduction to both of our speakers. Mark Shelburne is the Senior Manager for Public Policy at Novogradac & Company. Mark joined Novogradac most recently this year in January. Mark's based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but he does work nationally, and we hope to see more of Mark in Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Novogradac, Mark was in-house counsel for the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, where he coordinated the Qualified Allocation Plan and initiated award-winning programs. He testified often before Congress, worked with many housing finance agencies, and wrote a book on the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Mark has a varied expertise, including supportive housing, allocation policies, IRS compliance, program innovation, and fair housing. As you can imagine, if you're general counsel for a housing finance agency, you get to know a lot about a lot of things. Mark now consults with state agencies, local governments, equity providers, lenders, attorneys, and developers on these topics and others. And Mark has a degree in law and city and regional planning from UNC Chapel Hill. Our second presenter is Holly Glauser, and Holly is the Director of Development for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. In this capacity, Holly is responsible for the development and administration of the agency's multifamily loan programs, including the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program and Penn Homes. And if any of you have attended a briefing on the Qualified Allocation Plan in the past, you know that Holly is hugely knowledgeable, entertaining, and provides words of wisdom for all of us on an annual basis on how to navigate the low-income housing tax credit process in Pennsylvania. Holly has been with PHFA since 1990, and previously, prior to becoming Director of Development, served as an Associate Counsel. Holly received a Bachelor of Business Administration degree from Emory University and her JD from the Dickinson School of Law. So we're going to start with Mark, and Mark's going to start on a general overview on how to comment on the Qualified Allocation Plan. I want to say that the timing for this program, and to thank the Housing Alliance for this program, the timing is perfect. Yesterday, the PHFA board did approve the draft Qualified Allocation Plan, and it is going out now for public comment. So the timing couldn't be more perfect. Mark, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, and good morning. Well, or I guess it seems like good morning to me because I'm actually coming to you from Salem, Oregon. I'm consulting with the allocating agency here on this very topic. So it is morning to me, and so I guess maybe it's good afternoon to y'all. I was especially happy to be invited to do this, and thanks to Liz for the invitation. And I'm probably supposed to say that I'm happy to do it because of my firm having opened up a new office in Malvern outside of Philadelphia. But it's really because of just liking so many people up there in Pennsylvania, especially Holly. She and I have actually been doing webinars together. I can't remember how many we've done together, but the first one was back in 2009 with the Recovery Act, and so and of course I have to mention my other favorite person at the agency there, Rebecca Peace, who, as y'all may know, is the Dean of In-House Counsel for allocating agencies. Y'all are very lucky to have folks like that running your state allocating agency. So, without further ado, I will get into the presentation. I will say that what I'm describing is not specific to Pennsylvania. I'm nowhere near expert enough in the state-specific aspects of that, besides Holly is, and we'll cover that. So what I'm talking about are general points that you can apply there and elsewhere, some of which may be more important than others in the particular context, but most of them should be at least somewhat helpful. So first is a little bit of background. Hopefully the slide advanced. Someone let me know if it didn't. A little background on the program we're talking about here. It's the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, created back in 1986 as part of the overall tax reform that took place then. Since then, it has been responsible for the creation of roughly 2.8 million apartments. It is, for all intents and purposes, the last man standing when it comes to producing affordable rental housing. Obviously, the Section 8 voucher program is of a similar scale and very large, but it's not creating new housing. It's just allowing people to access housing that's already there. In terms of building and rehabilitating units, this is it. This is where all the action is taking place. And what that amounts to is about 100,000 units annually, which is both a lot in, again, this context of what's being built, but of course is nothing compared to the need. All of the units that get constructed are for rental housing. None of them are owner-occupied. They have to be affordable to and occupied by folks at 60% of area median income, which varies tremendously from place to place, including within a state. Some states can certainly have lower income targeting. As I recall, for example, Pennsylvania has an incentive for targeting to folks below 20% of AMI.
Can I interject for just 1 second,
Mark?
I think this is really helpful. Can you maybe speak up a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Thanks.
Yep. Sorry about that. And although it is a federal program that's handled through the U.S. tax code, it is administered almost entirely at the state level. The IRS is involved, but state agencies, again, PHFA there in Pennsylvania, does almost all of the work in making this program happen. So what is a Qualified Allocation Plan? Well, it is required under IRS Code Section 42. And that's where these program rules live. This is a tax program. It's not a HUD program at all. HUD does have some touch points with the work, but it is done, it really is, it is a tax program. And so what Section 42 says is each allocating agency has to have a Qualified Allocation Plan. And so this document, the QAP, contains the rules for how that state will distribute tax credits, and then also the requirements that owners will follow for both applying for the program, for the resource, and then once they're funded, what they have to do going forward. The document is drafted by the agency, by the staff there, and then it's approved ultimately by the governor. And as is the case there in Pennsylvania, it's in between, it's approved by a board or some other group along the way. But really, it's the agency staff that does the vast majority of the work in almost every state. And so while there are really just a couple of things that are set at the federal level that have to be in a QAP, pretty much everything else is determined at the state level. And even those couple of things are open to a great degree of interpretation by the state in how it does that. And so there is, again, even though this is a federal program and it's determining a resource that is used against the federal treasury, it is almost all decided at the state level. And I apologize that we don't have time to explain the way the tax credit works to make housing affordable. Maybe at the end we could get into that. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, I can just tell you that it does. And there are a lot of resources out there to explain how that works that would be good to know if you want to continue going forward in this. So these rules for how this resource gets allocated are determined at the state level. And you there in Pennsylvania are coming up on a time when you can potentially have some influence on those rules. And that is the point. The question here is how to best do that. Well, the thing is, everyone who submits comments is equal. There's, no one's better than others, but people can be more and less effective in their comments and their input, depending on how they do it. So what I'm going to try to do here is explain some of the ways in which you can be better in how you do that. And there are multiple reasons for this. One is that agencies, including Holly, I'm sure would say they really need your help because they don't have either a large staff or in some cases they don't have any staff at all to do research. This is not a federal agency where you've got a whole division that's set aside with policy analysts. That's just not the case with these state agencies. They're lean and mean. And so what they need is input from partners and stakeholders who are on the ground, who are doing the work and seeing how things happen from their perspective and can provide that input. And so what I'm going to describe here, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a general focus, and it may not apply, all of it may not necessarily apply everywhere. So you're definitely not too late. Now is the time to start. But obviously before you comment, you ought to read the document or at least scan for the parts that are most relevant to what your interest areas are, and then find out what's going on with, especially here in Pennsylvania since you've got such a great statewide organization, but really any state that you might be working in, find out what's happening with those statewide coalitions and what they may or may not be doing in this context. So how to make this input. The first, and this is first for a reason because it's the most important, you've got to be as specific as possible. And as is often the case in life, don't make assumptions. And part of being specific is using real-world facts and examples whenever you can. Actual data, numbers. Numbers are great. And then when it comes to the words, to the extent that you can, write out exactly what you want the QAP to say. Now, Holly in whatever state you're in may not take that. They may not use that, but at the very least it'll help. And it'll help you to think about how this content could get drafted. And what you may find is, in some cases, it's really hard to do, and that can help inform you in what you're submitting. General requests, by contrast, are something you really don't want to do because they really have very little impact, just vague, broad statements. They're hard to act on. They're hard to really know what they mean. And again, don't assume that the agency knows what you want to have happen. You got to say it, even if it might seem obvious to you. So next, don't wait. Comment early. The famous Al Capone advice on voting, do it early and often. It applies here in the QAP commenting context. Really, the best time to have submitted the comments would have been before yesterday, because you really want to get your ideas in before that first draft comes out. So that's something to remember for next year, that you don't want to wait till the first draft comes out, because if you get your comments in beforehand, then you can affect what's in that first draft. And you really need that if you're asking for something that's a big change, because states, if they're going to do a big change, they're going to want to put it out there for comments early on, right away. So you got to get it into their thinking before that first draft comes out. But at a minimum, don't take any more than 10 days. So whatever is 10 days from now, the 21st, you really should try to get your comments in before then. Don't wait longer than that. And part of the reason why you don't need to wait is you really don't need to worry about I'll get to that in a second. But even if, let's say, you're not able to figure out what you want by now, you're sometime in November, December, and you have an idea, go ahead and send it in, or any time really. Whenever you've got a thought, go ahead and pass it along. Now, in different states, that may or may have different consequences for that timing. May have different consequences to how much weight it has. But even if you submit it at a time when it doesn't have as much weight, then when you get to the time when you should turn that in, just turn it in again. There's really no reason. You don't have to sit around and wait for an official period. You can submit it as the Spirit moves you. So, but if you are submitting something, say there's multiple drafts, because some states will have a second draft of the QAP, go ahead and submit again. That's totally fine. But don't just repeat what you said the first time. Try to advance the discussion, evolve your comments and your statements, because if you just are repeating what you said the first time, then if it didn't work that first time, it's something didn't fit. So you want to at least try to rephrase it somewhat. Now, when you're submitting these comments, you don't want to just talk about negative stuff. If something is in the QAP that you like, and it's working well, that's fitting your organization's mission, go ahead and say that, because you can't take for granted that something that's in there will always be in there, because whatever you like, odds are someone doesn't like, and are going to be that other party, there's a chance that someone else is going to be critical of it. And so if you said nothing and theirs is the only comment about this thing that you like, well, then maybe it goes. And you find out later that this policy that benefited you or your constituency is now gone. And I know we've got some folks here that are in the services world. That's one area. If there's something that these projects are doing that serve the people that are your clients that work well, it could be that there's a developer out there who finds that type of work, that type of activity to be challenging. And so they may comment that needs to change. And again, this is just totally hypothetical. And so it could be that by both of you submitting your comments on that the policy gets to evolve to where both sides win, as opposed to, again, if only one side is critical and the other one says nothing, then it could just be something that goes away. And the corollary to that is to be aware that someone disagrees with you, whether they say it or not. There's really nothing that is completely uniformly liked in a resource allocation document, because it's a zero-sum game. Something that happens has an opportunity cost. And so whatever that something is, there's someone that has to bear that opportunity cost. So there's really nothing that is completely universally accepted. So this may not sound like a big deal to say that formalities are not important, but it really can be, because you don't want to waste your time and delay submitting your comments, or spend time looking at your commas and your paragraph structure and that kind of thing, when really you need to focus on the substance. You can even come up with bullet point lists. You don't need full sentences. And I know that may seem strange coming from an attorney to say this, but that is what matters, is the content, not where you got your commas. You do need to be aware, though, that there's a possibility that anything you submit, as is the case with anything with a public agency, could be public. It's possible that either someone's going to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to see the various QAP comments, or an agency could just decide to post them all on their website. There are some states that do that. So be aware of that as you're submitting your comments, but that shouldn't limit you very much in what you would say. And it's also, generally speaking, okay to try to reach out to the staff to discuss these things. Obviously, I can't speak for Holly and her staff's time, because I know they are definitely very busy. But as a general matter, agencies are open to having conversations with interested parties about the rules and how they work and how they could be different. And that can inform when you submit your comments and how you submit your comments. This second to last point here, group of points, is very important. You have got to step back and be realistic about the outcomes. And just to go, it's kind of connected to the point about being specific. You need to look at, to the extent possible, what are results more than what are your opinions, to talk about proven outcomes on the ground rather than what you happen to think is good. And when you're making comments, you got to look at the program's limitations. I mean, if you want it to do a certain thing, you need to step back and think, well, is that really possible? Or even if it is possible, will the opportunity cost of that action will the consequence be so dramatic on someone else that it just won't be viable? And so you got to think about that, because while the Housing Credit Program is a very powerful resource in this context, it definitely cannot do everything. There are very real limits on what it can accomplish as a program. And the other reason to know this and be aware of this is because you don't want to say something wrong if you can help it. Now, it's okay just to take a risk, but if you say something that's wrong, then the person that's reading that is going to be able to, and almost have to, kind of disregard it, and that can potentially even put a dent in the other comments that you have that aren't necessarily wrong. Again, back to an earlier point, don't assume that those who are reading what you submit know what you know, because they really might not. The folks at PHFA and other states have been around for a long time and they've seen a lot of things, but there are a lot of things they haven't seen, they haven't done, because of the role that they have, that you may know more than they do. And really, there's no point in trying to use, the word here on the slide, spin, trying to shade or shape your argument. It's just not going to help you long term and can really undermine your credibility. So the last point is patience. You need to realize that the patience and reflecting that you don't really know what went on behind the scenes. So it could be that you turned in your comments and it looked like there was no response. Well, you don't know that the fact that you submitted your comments prevented something else from happening that could have been worse. Your comments may have prevented some other change that may have been to the detriment of what you wanted. It's also possible that what you're asking to have happen just is ahead of its time, and the agency and other stakeholders are going to need a year to think about it before it's possible. And if you get the chance to hear why your ideas were implemented, really listen to that, take it in, and think about how to either change your argument or change your thinking, because it could be that what you want really actually is not the right thing, and maybe there's some other way to accomplish what you want to see happen. So I believe I have at least taken up my allotted time, and so with that I will turn it back over to Dina.
Great. Thank you, Mark. That was very helpful, very informative. And again, for those folks on the call, if you have questions, you can start to submit your questions or your comments, and we will, after Holly finishes her presentation, open it up for conversation and questions. So thank you, Mark. That was great. Holly, you are up next.
Well, thank you very much, Dina, and thank you all. And where I am, Mark, it is the afternoon, so it is the lunch hour here in Pennsylvania, and I'm at my desk. And again, I just want to thank the Housing Alliance and the folks putting together this, and really having Mark on the call. And I think we've all talked about with each other that we're each other's fans. There's no one more than I know in the housing credit world and the housing finance agent world that I respect as it relates to how allocation plans are formulated and also implemented, and appreciate having Mark now on the other side doing this and really able to interject and really communicate and give constructive suggestions on how to comment on the plan and how to communicate with the agency. I think I do echo, and I'm going to go with the first slide here. The allocation plan and how we look at it in Pennsylvania is really a collaborative process. And the thoughts and many of the things that Mark has already discussed is, and he did use the words hear and listen. And I think it's one of the things that we pride ourselves here in Pennsylvania is that when comments are made to the agency, we not only we hear them, but we actually listen and process. And I can assure those folks on the phone and with us this afternoon that the agency looks at it as a collaborative process. And although we go through the revision/release/adoption over a couple months in the year, starting with July and going through yesterday and into the future, we do look at it as an annual review. So to the extent, as Mark suggested, if there are any comments or suggestions or clarifications all through the year of what we could do to improve, address, obviously with the goal of furthering our mission at the agency, we would appreciate your comments at any given time. So now we're going through the more formal process of adopting the 2016 allocation plan. And so my thought was to give a general overview of our current comment process, and then also since, as Dina did highlight earlier, the current allocation plan or the second draft of the allocation plan is available, would go over the major changes from the previous year plan. So my remarks this afternoon are going to talk about where we are now in the comment process, and then talk a little bit about what some of the more major changes. So what we've done so far is we actually released our first draft of our 2016 allocation plan in July. And that plan, but for maybe some changes of dates and I would call it more cleanup items and clarifications, really did not have more substantive changes because we had not yet at that point in time gone out with what I call more of the open process, which is send out a written survey and actually have a focus group of many of the stakeholders, and some of you who are on this webinar, I believe may have attended some of those sessions and submitted written survey responses, and I appreciate for that. The written survey was sent out in July. We received 25 written comments. And I echo Mark's remarks. One of the best ways for us to understand what the goals are of potential changes and suggestions you have, to have them in writing is the most helpful way for us to process. And to have them as suggested changes or in language that you would like to see it incorporated is very helpful to us. So we received 25 survey responses in August. We also held a focus group, as I mentioned, with about 50 folks, and it was a very lively discussion on August 17th. And again, that was another point in time that we will rely on others to say what could we do, could we do better in process, and then maybe where were we falling short on some goals that we should meet and the like. So we had that meeting on July 17th. Next step, as mentioned earlier, the draft QAP was approved, or the revised draft QAP was approved by our board yesterday, September 10th. It is available on our website. It has also been emailed to those of you who have signed up for our email blasts. They come regularly. If you do not or did not receive a copy of that email blast and would like to do that, I would suggest that you send an email to Lisa Lutz. It's llutz@phfa.org, and she can ensure that you are added to that list. We think that's really an important way for us to communicate with our partners and vice versa on the comings and goings of PHFA. As Mark mentioned, it was curious, he said 10 days. So actually our comment period is about 10 days from today. We would like to receive written comments back to us on the proposed changes to our plan by September 21st. And we are going to hold a public hearing on September 22nd at 9 o'clock in the morning at the agency's offices. And this is actually required under the Internal Revenue Code, under Section 42. So in order for us to adopt an allocation plan and administer the tax credits, we actually have to have a formal hearing, and that will be September 22nd at the agency. For 2016, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the note dates that you should look to and some of the changes in the QAP now, and move on to that. So last year, we suggested, I think we called it strongly recommended, that interested applicants submit an intent to submit to us about 2 months in advance of the application. For 2016, we are going to make that mandatory. The date of the submission is January 8th, 2016. Dina already brought to my attention that there's actually an error in our QAP and mentioned it as January 9th. That's a Saturday. So that will be probably the first change that we've noticed in the QAP that will be changed. So just please put mark January 8th on your calendar for an intent to submit. And the application deadline is on March 4th, 2016. Once again, we are going to allocate credits by pools. Last year, we went back to a one-time application, one cycle, so March 4th is the deadline, one time. But we allocate tax credits in two pools. We have an urban pool, which approximately 50% of the tax credits are allocated, and suburban/rural, and that the other half of the agency's availability of tax credits will be allocated. We will once again use our preferences with types of projects, and so they are not changing as of now for 2016. And what we do is we allocate to a certain number of types of developments in each pool. So for example, in the urban pool, at a minimum, we will target 3 developments that will be set aside for general occupancy, 2 developments for senior 62 plus with services, at a minimum 3 preservation, 2 supportive housing, once again. In an urban area, we call them community impact developments. They're limited to, or at a minimum, 3. In our suburban rural, we call them areas of opportunity awards, and it's the same number, would be 3. We are going to continue with our Innovation and Design Award, which is tax credits to a development or developments awarded outside of ranking, the selection criteria, that are selected by a juried panel that will review the proposal. And really the goal here is to do something a little bit different, innovate. Obviously the word is innovation and design. A little bit more or substantially more than the threshold criteria and the selection criteria in the QAP. They could be design standards, they could be funding, collaborations, or something new, and we've seen a few in the supportive housing arena. And then we also have another category called strategic investment. So the types of projects are going to still be the targets on the way we allocate credits. So this, if you have looked at, and I've already taken a once-over on the QAP that's available on our website, the changes to the selection criteria is what I'm going to talk about next. They are highlighted in red on the copy that we have disseminated. And some areas that we are looking to make some modifications specifically are in our community and economic impact section. And some of these were actually a response to what we heard from both the focus group and the surveys. And one of the things that we did here is that the term, I'll call it transparency. And while the agency had some scoring criteria that we used for internal purposes, they were not clearly articulated in the selection criteria. So what you will see for 2016, and again this was a response to a number of comments we've received already, is that in the community and economic impact and the leveraging of resources, we clearly outlined the number of points that would be available in these categories. So going back to community and economic impact, one of the categories we did not have as an evaluating factor is strong school performance. Clearly, you know, that is something that we feel strongly that is a goal in siting developments to ensure, especially in family projects, that there's opportunities for the residents of their properties. So if you look at the QAP, under the scoring for general occupancy in community impact, there will be 18 points available based on the location of the development, and then another 2 points would be available for those properties that are located in school districts that have been determined to be strong performers. One of the challenges at the moment, and its timing is always everything as you put together a qualified allocation plan, the Department of Education just this week, actually on Tuesday. And when I say the Department of Education, it's the Commonwealth's. The Secretary of Education and Governor Wolf appealed to the Federal Department of Education for a waiver, specifically as it relates to performance metrics available, because there was a new PSSA test that is following the Common Core principles, and apparently there was a decrease in some of the scoring for the 3rd and 8th graders. So we're currently taking a look at that and see how it applies to this scoring metric. We believe that we will be able to still move forward with it. We are going to talk to folks at the Department of Education just to make sure we're capturing the right data set, and you will see that in the next draft. So again, it's interesting. Timing is everything. The QAP went out last week to our board, put strong school performance based on Commonwealth standards, and then earlier this week there's been some modifications, so we're going to look into that. The next bullet there, or line there, as I mentioned, we're going to we specified criteria for community revitalization, and I'm going to go over those right now. These are factors that we look at in new construction or substantial rehab, that there is a community revitalization plan specific to the neighborhood in which the project is being sited, evidence of public investment, and that goes beyond the siting of the tax credit project in the community. It could be that it's in a neighborhood that's a choice neighborhood, that there's other investment in the form of schools, community centers, additional public-private partnerships. If the property has a mixed income composition in the unit composition, there are points available for that. If the project is transit-oriented design, and we have said specifically that the property needs to be located within a half a mile of a fixed transit opportunity, whether it's a bus stop or train station. We used last year, and we're going to continue to use this year, walk score as a metric in awarding points. And that's clearly articulated in the draft allocation plan. And we will conduct site visits. We've done this for the last couple years. Senior staff will go to every site and really look at, I'll call it the intangibles, the on location, is it suitable for redevelopment, new construction, what's in the neighborhood. For preservation developments, we look at community revitalization a little differently. Since the property is already existing, we're not going to be relying on community revitalization plans. But again, we will look at public investment in this category. We will also look at if there's at risk that the development may be lost to a conversion to market or sale outside of the tax credit program or other affordable opportunities to the residents. Their points will be awarded for a potential loss of the existing project due to obsolescence or critical physical needs. So again, we look at energy improvements, we look at accessibility improvements, or major life, health and safety issues that need to happen at the property. So points would be awarded for that. And then similar to the new construction, if there's a mixed income component, if it's located close to transit, we will look at the walk score, and we will also conduct a site visit. So again, we heard from folks that there was a need for transparency in scoring. So the QAP for 2016 specifically has how many points in each one of those categories that are going to be awarded. Another thing that we have looked at and expanding in 2016 is the category of development team experience. The last time we had it in our QAP was about 10 years ago. And with regard to both ranking on whole development team experience, meaning the developer, their number of developments that they had under their belt, so to speak, in the tax credit world. Now that is a threshold criteria, we need minimum levels of experience, so that's threshold. We are incorporating in this QAP points for and really are encouraging participation at the development team level and also at the services level of team members of small diverse businesses. So they are defined as minority-owned, women-owned, veterans-owned, or disabled veterans-owned. And we are looking at the Department of General Services qualifications for meeting those criteria. One of the comments we received from a number of folks at our focus group is that nonprofit organizations are not incorporated, so therefore they don't fall within the purview of DGS. And we have expanded this criteria to include nonprofit organizations as long as at least 51% of the members of the board are comprised of the minority women or veteran individuals. So we would look at it as a organizational level for participation for qualification. Points will be awarded based on a percentage of the total development cost that the contract would be for. And there's various levels, and please take a look at the QAP, and they're clearly outlined there. But we're looking at it for participation on professional services, contractors, subcontractors, vendors, the developer, and the management agent. And so the QAP specifically outlines the percentage of the total development costs that would be required to meet or to achieve points. The other thing we are looking to do is really try to expand and encourage, and while it is not in this version of the QAP, the guidelines that we are drafting right now would permit that at certain levels, because if it was a $10 million project, total development cost, and 1% was the minimum requirement, which would be $100,000, we would look at the availability to aggregate, for example, at the subcontractor level, so you could have 3 contracts coming up to that $100,000 value. So we are going to be putting that in the guidelines as far as what the minimum participation levels would be under development team experience. A few more things that have changed and additional point consideration in the 2016 allocation plan, and this also as a response and covered in both the survey and the focus group, is zoning. The last several years there were 5 points awarded under the QAP for having zoning by right. And the developer in the application at a minimum had to demonstrate, typically from a letter from a zoning official or planning, that the property was properly zoned, and that would be 5 points would be available to those developments. As the agency really is looking for more developments to move forward, I'll call it more quickly or ready, and a number of the developments that we did get applications had already gone through the full zoning process. We have suggested to include an additional 5 points for those properties that have all approvals secured, meaning any variance or special exception. So it would be 5 points for having zoning by right, with an additional 5 points available to those developments that have gone through the full zoning process. And then the next change, and really it is the last change that I'm going to cover this afternoon, is leveraging / commitment of funds. Again, in the spirit of transparency, the proposed 2016 allocation plan has a percentage of, again, with the total development cost for different levels of outside funding. And so there's a couple categories. One would be amortizing debt, hard debt, soft municipal funding, public funding, and then also either private investment, foundations, the value of historic tax credits. So you will see in that section specifically all the different types of financing that would be included for receiving an award of points for leveraging of funds. There's a separate scale for, and traditionally those are preservation projects, that we would include the value of assumption of existing debt or related party seller financing in preservation developments. Points are also available for unit subsidies. So if the development has project-based subsidy secured in the form of Section 8 or an ACC for some of the units, and there's a percentage in there, points would be available. And additionally, 1 point would be available for those projects that evidence that a tax abatement was secured. Next step, as mentioned earlier, we intend to bring the QAP back to our board for final approval on October 8th. What we will do is, again, take the comments that hopefully many of you who are on the line today will submit to us. As Mark said, please try to be as specific as possible. Happy to, if you gave us examples, if there was any language, almost verbatim, suggested to be incorporated. Again, September 21st is the date we'll take written comments, and the public hearing is on the 22nd. Again, application, we're going to go back to the board on October 8th, and we have already, and many of you have probably already received today, going to be holding our pre-application meeting for 2016 low-income housing tax credits on October 22nd. If you did not receive that email, again, L. Lutz, Lisa Lutz, would be the contact person, and we'd be happy to include you on that list. That's all I have for the moment, and then would I throw it back to you, Dina.
Thank you, Holly. That was very, very, very helpful and very clear, and I'm sure that all the people who are on the call really appreciate that very thorough analysis of this year's QAP and some of the changes. We are now open for questions, and we're not getting overrun with questions here. So if people have questions or would like to comment on either something that Mark commented on or mentioned, or that Holly articulated that's more direct to the Pennsylvania Qualified Allocation Plan and its procedures and process, please do submit your questions. You just have to type them. And to follow from Mark, you don't even have to type them neatly.
Yep, and you can also unmute yourself by doing *7.
And you can unmute and ask the question. That's a good point as well.
Yep, it's just, again, it's *7 to make a comment or ask a question.
*7 to ask a comment, and what's the one to unmute? To unmute, right, *7?
Yes.
Okay, *7 to unmute. I'm going to, while we're waiting for other people to jump in, I'm going to just ask one or two comments or one or two questions just to get the ball rolling as well. Holly, one of the things that you mentioned was that people are, and I want to be clear, I want to make sure that everybody understands that people can comment on changes to the QAP, but I guess I want to ask both of you whether it's appropriate to comment on things that have been in the QAP for a while, if somebody finds something that is a question or a comment, or is it really just focused on changes to the QAP? And I open up to both Holly and Mark.
Dina, I think we welcome any comment to any part of the QAP and the process as well. We are open to any suggestions, and I think as Mark indicated earlier, we have collectively done this for a number of years, and I've been active personally in the tax credit program for a number of years. But don't obviously know everything about what's either A, in the best interest of the Commonwealth, or B, what might make a project or a proposed development work better. So to the extent that we do rely on all of our partners in the community to make suggestions to us. So while I did only go over the changes here, we do welcome any type of suggestion in the QAP.
Terrific. We did just get a question that was posited, so it is addressed to you, Holly. And the question is, can you clarify on the points related to school quality? And is it based on the quality of the school district and not based on the quality of the school for which the development is in that catchment area?
Okay, so the answer is, at this moment, and this is how we intend to proceed, again, now I think after we have additional conversations with the Department of Education, so it's all contingent on that. We were looking at the senior high school and where the school district or the closest to the catchment area for the location. So it would be the feeder school, senior high school. One of the things we're hearing with regard to the changes in the PSSAs, which had some decreased scoring, is that they are not going to make any changes to the criteria looked at at the senior high school level. So one of our thoughts was to use the senior high schools as the baseline, also because one of the things that they look at when they have the data, and if you go on schoolperformance.org, I believe is the website. I have it cited in the QAP itself. You can look at the high school, and there's a number of factors that are looked at in addition to standardized tests. So we have the Keystones right now in Pennsylvania, but they do look at attendance, they look at graduation rates, they look at growth as an element. And I think we're really looking to some of those numbers as we start to drill down. So as of, what's the time right now? I say 12:51 on September 11th. I think that's where we are going at the moment, subject to additional conversations with the folks at the Department of Education.
That's great. Thank you. Does anybody want to unmute their phone and ask a question? Don't be shy. It's not a shy group when it comes to the focus group meetings or the pre-application meetings, that's for sure. Okay, then I'll ask another one. Holly and Mark, to whom are these questions, if you have comments, to whom do you address them? And is it referenced in the QAP? And is it best to send them to, say, in Pennsylvania, you, Holly, with a copy to somebody? To whom do you send your comments?
Mark, why don't you answer that first, and then I'll answer it second.
Sure. Yes, I would say in Pennsylvania, as I understand it, the best thing to do is to submit them to Holly, and then if it's on a subject in which that relates to a particular project or a particular topic on a project, then you could copy the underwriter, that sort of thing. One of the topics I didn't cover, because it's not great to put in writing, but it is important to keep in mind that there's a temptation to go over the head of folks in Holly's position, either to the executive director or to elected officials, board members, that kind of thing. And anyone can do that. Everyone has the right to do that, but my advice on that is always to at least start with the agency folks. Give them a chance to talk about whatever is that issue, whatever the issue might be, before going around and going over them to someone else in a higher level position. And there's several reasons for that. One is because it's usually just not going to be necessary. But the other is, once you go out, the higher up you go and just face it, this is like anything else, it's a political process. The higher up you go, the more risk you get of unintended consequences. I mean, you might think, well, okay, I'm going to go to this, state representative and ask them to do X, and maybe they'll do X and maybe they won't. But what you don't realize is that maybe instead of doing X, they'll do Y or Z, and those things are bad for you and the project or the program, and you just have to think twice about those kinds of unintended consequences before you start going up the chain to get your way. And I guess in a way that's a corollary to my last point about being patient. Don't think that just because you didn't get what you wanted in your particular request right away that you've got to give up on the staff and go around them or above them, because really you just take some time, learn about the issue, and have a conversation. And also engage the people who are on the other side of it. Because a lot of times what happens is when you're at the agency, you got two people that are arguing at you, when if they would just talk to each other, maybe they could work it out. And then the agency would be happy to get on board with whatever the two different opposing views want to see happen. So I think that's a lot more of an answer than you asked for there, Dina. But
no, I think it's exactly the kind of it's exactly what and I want to encourage also, just to follow up on that we, particularly if you're going to work in whatever state you're going to work in, unless you're just stopping in for a short visit, it is going to be a long-term relationship with the people you're working with at the Housing Finance Agency. And there's just no reason not to develop that trust and that dynamic with the people with whom you're going to be working. So if you jump them and go above them, it's sort of disrespectful. And it's probably not going to be helpful for a long-term relationship.
And if I can jump in, I just want to echo that, all of our staff here at the agency are very approachable, and I think most of you who work with us know that. So to the extent that it's a question regarding, and I see a couple questions regarding accessibility coming up, some of our requirements. Stan Sawalki, who is our manager of architecture and engineering, is very approachable with regard to those requirements or energy efficiency. So if there are some concerns or questions, feel free to extend it to him. And if not, it comes to me, I send it to Stan. And we do work collaboratively here in the agency and go through all of the proposed changes and comments that we get. So, I get the comment, it gets circulated among our entire staff, from Carl Dudek, who is the Director of Management, the folks in Housing Services. So we talk to each other. We give each other suggestions and comments and really look to that input and really would be happy to entertain any questions at any point in time, as Mark indicated earlier, with regard to improvements or clarifications or questions, because maybe we're not communicating them as clearly as we think sometimes is the intent in the QAP.
Holly, do you want to quickly address these accessibility issues?
Sure, yes. And I see that Jeff Eisman has a couple questions. Specifically as it relates to supportive housing developments, do they need to be visitable, or is there a minimum number of accessible units? All our projects, not just supportive housing, actually have minimum standards and they're threshold criteria. So they are really entry for an application to get an allocation of tax credits. So visitability is required in 100% of new construction projects. And what I would suggest, Jeff, if you do have the QAP available or it's on our website, look at page 12. We have our visitability standards specifically on page 12. With respect to accessibility, at a minimum, 5% of all of our, and this is all projects, not just supportive housing, have to be accessible. And the agency incentivizes additional accessible units through the point system. So if a project designates at least 10% of the units as accessible, then points would be given. And I would probably say 90% of all of our projects meet those criteria. And then I believe, Jeff, you had another question regarding serving populations low income, including folks with disabilities. And if you take a look at our QAP again, we achieve that through supportive housing. We have a specific set aside for or preference for supportive housing developments. And again, because we are really trying to achieve 20% of our units to 10% of our units to individuals at or below 20% of area median income. Many of them are persons with disabilities.
Joyce, do we have time for one more question, or do we need to wrap up?
No, I think we can do one more question.
We have one more question, Holly. This is more directed again on the QAP, and it's on the question of examples of innovation of design. Are there specific innovations that you would prioritize in the scoring process? So I think trying to get a better understanding of what that means, and I don't know if you can do that in 2 minutes, but if you want to give it a shot.
Sure, and if I could give some examples of ones that have won it in the past. As I mentioned earlier, it is a juried competition, and what we're looking for is those developments that go above and beyond the minimum requirements of the QAP. The first awardee of the Innovation and Design Award was a project located in Pittsburgh that was 2 buildings. One of the buildings, and this was designed to passive house standards. The other was going to be designed to conventional standards, and the goal was to have an analysis of the difference in cost and performance of those two. In addition, that project had half of the units that were set aside for youth aging out of foster care. So again, that was something new and different that we had not seen really in both of those elements, both in the energy efficiency and also in passive house. So it was both design and population-centric. We had another development that received it because it was a collaboration of 4 different types of community services. So it was a senior development that would have a food bank located at it, had a senior center. It was really reaching out as a collaboration of community activities. So one is not weighed a little bit more than the other. So while it's innovation in design, the design is not necessarily structural. It could be partnering with funders or availability of services.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I just make one final comment about commenting on the QAP? And that is that, and Mark I think referenced it as well, you should take the opportunity to also thank the agency for the work that they do. And I don't mean in a way that's kind of to butter up, but I mean in a sort of a genuine way. We have in many states, but I can speak to Pennsylvania, we have a very, very, very positive state agency, and you should start with the assumption that people are doing their best and they're working hard, and we have great success in PA and other states as well, but never hurts to also thank people for the work they're doing.
Well, I'd like to, on behalf of the Housing Alliance, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and certainly for our presenters and moderator today. It was great. So thanks, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.